Hello, everyone. This is Zaylen. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our guest is actually in London. Infidel and myself are in the United States, so we just had to be a little sensitive to the time. Hi, Dale.
Hi, are you sure you want me to have a mic? How you doing?
Yeah,
Hi, everybody.
this is going to be a great evening with our guests. For those that have not heard of this author before, you'll get the opportunity to ask questions as well as just get to know the author a little bit and about his book.
I've known Harry since I just started on Twitter. Which everybody knows for me, it was, or most people know. I'm sorry, I should say that was me reaching out, looking for like minds, looking for friends. And Harry was one of my earlier people I connected with, and he is an author. And I could tell he was, intelligent and well spoken. And it made me, because I am a little, and I love saying this phrase, and everybody knows, articulately barbed sometimes. But as articulately barbed as I can be, Harry, who is a straight shooter, I guess maybe I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but a little more appropriate than I am with his words, showed interest in me, and that meant something. So I just wanted to say that he's a really good guy, and we've had a connection for quite a while. He sent me his book through the mail way before this was going on. Actually, I think he was the first person who sent me their book and said, "Hey, I'd like you to read it, and I'd like your opinion." So I have an affinity for Harry as far as his ability, his intellect, and also what he's trying to accomplish. So I look forward to hearing more about him and learning about him personally.
Well, I am here and I am very glad to be on your space.
Hi, Harry. It's so wonderful to have you here. So, first of all, we had a really wonderful conversation with Harry yesterday just to kind of get to know him as well. I know Dale has had a bit more of a rapport with him in the past. So, this just really great opportunity for our listeners to get to know who you are as an author, as well as learn a little bit more about your book.
Harry is a question asker. And I like that. People who know me know I kind of harp on the Socratic method. Not that I use it all of the time in public myself. However, I'm a big fan of that. And Harry makes people think. And I think it's important in a lot of ways to get people to think, to come up with the own answers to the questions, to where it's not you're feeding them, this is why it's this way, but what do you think about, posing questions that you yourself would have asked to get to a different position than they're at? With that said, I said before you got here, Harry, I told everybody, I've been a fan for a little while, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, if you're okay, starting off just a little bit of your background story, and then maybe tell us how that led to you writing the book that we're going to be talking about.
Thank you. This is not going to be all about me. I hope we're going to be a bit of substance, but I'll take your cue and tell everybody about myself. And
You are substance, but it'll be about a few.
So I had my first formative years in a refugee camp in Austria after the Second World War, and rabbis got hold of me and indoctrinated me in fear of God. I was 6.5 when we left there. In the meantime, at the age of 5 to 5.5, I was already reading the most difficult Hebrew text and even teaching older kids. When the rabbi went for a break, he would tell me, "Why don't you take over, Harry?" And I did. Coming to Sweden from that experience at the age of 6.5, 10 years after the war, we came to Malmö, and Malmö was quite spectacular in the sense that that was the neo-Nazi headquarters of Europe. I ran into neo-Nazis everywhere, swastikas on my door, not rid of what we had experienced in Austria. And this continued. I'm going to jump a little forward and say this continued until my university years, when I had a known neo-Nazi law professor sitting in the front and me in the back staring at each other. At that time, there was nobody to complain to. To go back in time a bit, what happened was when I was 12 on a Yom Kippur, which is a Jewish fasting holiday, I fainted. And the rabbi came running out and he said, "You can eat, Harry. You're not 13 yet. You're not bar mitzvah." And I refused. The Lubavitch rabbis in New York heard about this, sent a delegation over to persuade my parents that I should, at their expense, go to New York and study rabbinical studies, adding to that, study medical studies to become a medical doctor. Now, that was quite interesting and an extremely tempting proposition for my parents. They had wanted to come to the USA, which didn't let us in because my mother had had TB during the war. I go forward a couple of years, I turn 14, and I one day decide, Harry, God can't really care about what you eat. And I decided I was going to challenge the Lord by going to a hot dog stand and eating a non-kosher hot dog, the first non-kosher meal in my life. And it was wonderful. And I thought I'll have another one, and I'll have another one, just because I never had it. When I had 10 hot dogs, I felt sick. And for a moment, my mind went, God is punishing me. And then I realized, no, I just had too many. That was the starting point of a journey which led to a lot of reading and quite a number of books. The formative book originally was The Source by James Michener, who had on the external part, it's a story about archaeological dig in Israel. And every time they find something was a biblically accurate biblical history. I don't believe there is any biblical history, but I'm just saying it for the occasion. Accurate little story around it. That got me so interested. I started reading biblical text, etc. I eventually, am I boring you, or do you want to interrupt or something, or shall I just go on a little
This is
longer?
one of the least boring stories I've ever heard. Please don't ask that again and continue. We'll stop you in a minute if we feel like it, but I am enthralled.
I
Uh,
love it.
yeah, and aside from the hot dog story, this is fantastic. That was hilarious. Please keep
So
going.
I went to university and I took the equivalent of an MBA and then half a law degree. I had too much to do and to work. I had this circular, fantastic thing going on, being indoctrinated into what biblical text is supposed to mean, not what it reads like. And then being able to step away from that and logically interpret text as if God knew what he was saying, not as if he didn't know. That helped me a lot in my career, to the extent that I actually had two countries having to renegotiate a treaty after I won a case. And that was around 30 years old. The funny thing about that is the next step is, when I then went back to reanalyzing biblical text, I of course had an enormous help from a career in interpreting words the way they were looking at it. And so the circular thing I had that went for me is my ability to study legal text allowed me to study legal text independent of what any professor had written, and I then did the same. If God wants to be clear, he can tell me what he wants. I don't need apologists, I don't need theologians, and the fact is God shouldn't need them either. So it comes to the pandemic. I've been taking notes for about 20 years, and I decided that my journey was a bit difficult, but it's worthwhile. So I thought I'd write what I call a questioning book. And the question was that, should I write to make people understand, or should I just write and be questioning? And I chose the second part. And the second part was that I want people to get to their own conclusions. I think that people are indoctrinated into belief are individually innocent. They can't help it. When you're in a bubble, you're in a Stockholm syndrome of belief. So what are you going to do? I believe that an jihadist suicide bomber is so indoctrinated that he doesn't turn around and look at his handlers who live a perfect life in this world, enjoy sex in this world, and don't go for virgins while they go kill themselves. So individual innocent, and then I come into the second point, which is tribalism, and that's what I think drives us to the stupid things we do, not only in religion, not only in denominations, and I'll end by saying that goes for politics and sports. I hope I haven't been too long here.
No, not at all. But one thing that I discovered reading through it is that you ask a lot of questions. For me, my takeaway was that was the purpose, is to get people thinking, and not necessarily that you're trying to force people in one way or the other, but definitely just to present, like, here are the questions and here's what I think, but then let me pose some more questions. Definitely an interesting takeaway for me.
You know, one thing I say a lot, and I say this phrase all the time, And a few people in here who know me will know this because it's one of the few tweets I've retweeted a few times. But I, with a comma in the important place, the most important place, I say, I don't want you to think like me. I just want you to think, comma, like me. And that's kind of what Harry's saying, and what you kind of, said. I don't want you to think the same way I do. I just want you to think. I just want you to try to figure this out, thinking logically, critically, rationally, and whatever you get to is what you get to. But the odds are most people will get to a similar stance. They're not going to get to, oh, the logical choice is snakes talk and people fly on donkeys and chop the moon in half. Like that won't be the conclusion. They may still believe in a creator, but we'll be a little more on a similar page if people take the time and effort to think about things as, critically as possible.
Thank you for that. Can I just add, and I have a slightly different opinion on that, and that is
No, you're not allowed to have a slightly different opinion.
even the ones of us who think rationally are still subject to the cultural bias from the place where we were brought up. And you have to be cognizant of that all the time. So I think an atheist in Saudi Arabia or an atheist in Pakistan and an atheist in Sweden will have different upbringings. And one of the things I think is very important is I don't mind people celebrating Christmas as long as they understand it has nothing to do with Jesus. There's a cultural element. And I myself, for instance, I enjoy church architecture. I can watch the midnight mass from the Vatican and enjoy the spectacle. It's beautiful.
Wait, hold on, Harry. I want to say one thing. Sorry to cut you off, but for everybody listening, midnight mass at the Vatican is very different than midnight mass on Netflix.
Yes. Thank you for that. So I'm just saying, and there's so many elements in this, and I think one can embrace the cultural elements, and one can have a reasonable understanding that people who are brought up in faith, they have trouble getting out. They're stuck in a bubble and don't know they're in it. And what I have difficulty with is not individual belief. It's when they get together in groups, they have a pastor, a theologian, or whoever it is, and the apologist, and then exert political power over the rest of us. That's my biggest concern about this. And that is an issue where we see all over the world. So just get a line in there that I really like and I've tweeted a lot about. When church had ultimate power in the West, we had Taliban-style lives. Never forget that. And never forget that when we are concerned about microaggression at home, look what the poor people in Afghanistan, in Iran go through, and in all the other Islamic countries. They are subject to, in the name of their God, morality police and oppression and misogyny for no reason.
Thank you for pointing that out too, because everybody here knows, Zaylen, I hit on it all the time, that a lot of the world is kind of, especially America, focused on the Christian-centric, world, the American-centric view, what have you. I mean, even in Europe too. But we have to realize that there are still so many people living under Sharia. These things that we're afraid of happening in America have been the way it is, and way worse for a long time in many countries. We see things slipping from what we've had, but it's not as bad or even close to as bad as it is in so many parts of the world, and we just need to keep that in mind. I just wanted to applaud you. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, and one of the points that Harry had made in the book was that many Christians, or especially Christian nationalists now, continually talk about, well, I can't wait for Jesus to come back. I can't wait, and you all are going to be sorry, and y'all are going to die, and you're going to burn in hell, and yada yada yada. So Harry points out that what is this wish that is so pertinent, because you realize that democracy goes away at that very moment it ceases to exist. I mean, why would anyone wish for that?
And you would live in a theocracy and God's rule direct on earth, and you would have no choice. As it is now, apologists and theologians and pastors and rabbis and mullahs, they are the ones who take over and tell us what we want. And just to go into one of the difficulties we have, so God is so bloody unclear. He doesn't want to give us a clear message so that we can believe without evidence. And then he does it differently in different geographies. And then these parents in different geographies, they indoctrinate their children, and then the sword is being used to spread that faith. Now, what kind of a God is that creates strife for no good reason? What omnipotence when he knows everything that's going on? It's amazing. It's amazing that people cannot see that the fact that religion and denominations are geographical means that there is no God. But that's my interpretation, and I understand how difficult it can be for some people inside the bubble to understand that. And those of you who listen here, when I've gone through what I've gone through, and probably much worse, especially some of my friends that I have come across who are ex-Muslim, they are truly suffering, and some of them fear for their lives, for the only reason that they want to be rational. It's amazing. I mean, what the God can do for you. And my view is, if you need to commit violent acts in the name of your God, you're in a way persuaded that your God is too weak to handle the issue himself. He could just do it. Why not?
And the only answer to why not is because he, she, it either doesn't exist or is incapable. That's the only
Yeah,
answer.
yeah, that's the only answer. I mean, but to come to that answer comes with a lot of pain in the process of deconverting. It is once you have deconverted and freed yourself that you have this liberation, and you can look at text that previously was holy, and in the Bible find some really nice elements, poetry. I have difficulty finding that in the Quran, which is a hugely boring book with the biggest surahs in the beginning. There's no timeline in it, and there's one line about there's no compulsion in religion, and then the rest of it is full of hatred. What will happen if we don't have the right faith? That's not even poetry. What is nice there is actually the writing when they do it beautifully, but that doesn't cut it.
When you say the writing, you mean the actual scripture, the way it's written.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah,
agree. It's beautiful.
exactly.
It is beautiful, very curvy. When you were telling your hot dog story at the beginning, which I thought was hilarious, my thought was, wait a minute. So eating those hot dogs was basically your first metaphorical look into how the sausage gets made. You know how other people
Yeah,
use that phrase to see behind
yeah,
the scenes? Well, yours began with hot dogs.
yeah.
Others is the sausage. Yeah.
Well, can I go from there to just a little quip that is funny? So the rabbis tell us that you can't mix milk and meat on the same plate without all kind of cleansing. It is forbidden, and God knows what happens to you. They forget that before the milk came out of the cow, it was surrounded by meat.
And that's a simple one, right? Again, it stares you right in the face. And you also said one more word I want to say, and I'd like to hear a tiny bit about your book before we eventually get to our Q&A. But when you said what kind of God would do that, it made me think of the Richard Dawkins thing, and I think I can do it close, like maybe not exact, but if anybody hasn't heard it, I think it's in the God Delusion. Yeah, in the God Delusion, Richard Dawkins says the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction. This is the part where I might mess up. He's jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, vindictive, bloodthirsty,
Yeah.
ethnocentric cleanser, misogynistic, homophobic, racist. This is my favorite. Infanticidal, genocidal, and there's a few more words that I lose, but megalomaniacal, whatever, all those other things, and he ends it with I missed a few, but he ends it with malevolent bully, and all of those things involved describe Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, and they really can't be argued with logic if you match it up with the text and the things that God does and says.
I think that there's a book either has been written or is about to be written about it by Dan Barker, who is going to take on all those attributes in every one in one separate chapter.
Dan Barker, he's one of my
Yeah, he's a
favorites.
very good
Yeah.
source, very good
His,
source. And
I think I actually mentioned to you yesterday when we were speaking here a couple days ago, the married bachelor. That was his thing, kind of. You can't be a married bachelor,
yeah.
And it's like he says that with can God be both or be omnipotent, omniscient, and benevolent?
Yeah.
Can he know all those things and still be kind to us? And it's not possible.
Yeah. You mentioned the Old Testament and you said that is evil. I mean, let me just put a little more thinking onto that and see how you like that. The New Testament has a Jesus who's a Jewish boy if he existed. I don't think he did, because there's no contemporaneous evidence. Nobody has interviewed the 3 dead that were raised that everybody would have known about. But Jesus says that he came to fulfill the law. He preached to Jews only. He preached in synagogues only. He didn't want to have anything to do with anything else. And when he died, his brother James did the same. So it was Paul who had a fit, or didn't, on the road to Damascus, who suddenly realized, well, I can make something new out of this. He never met Jesus and fantasized the story and started selling it as Judaism light. You don't have to eat kosher, you don't have to be circumcised, but God is there. And then you have the first seeds of this. And this Jesus, who is claimed to be so good, let's remember that when he says, turn the other cheek, that is in context. The line before is, do not resist an evil person. So don't resist evil, go with it. There are several lines in the New Testament that talks about Satan, or the devil is the ruler of this world. Satan could tempt Jesus, but most of all, he really came to fulfill the law. And so how nasty this gets is the Christian story. They believe that the fact that God sacrificed Jesus, which is in John 3:16, because he gave his only begotten son, he so loved this world, that is an evil act. I was about to swear, but I stopped myself. An evil effing act, which means anybody who believes that that is good should probably be prepared to die for my sins. How does that even happen? What's good about it? And right now, I think the Pope is trying to throw distance between the Old and New Testament as if the New were any better. Jesus came with a sword, not to bring peace, but to even throw discord.
That's another thing I was going to say. For anybody, that's not a line that Harry's saying. That's Matthew 10:34, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He says, do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to earth, but I have come to bring the sword.
Yeah.
I've come not to bring peace, but the
Yeah.
sword, he says.
Yeah.
Yeah, so gentle Jesus, so meek and mild, right?
Dale, my view on this is Jesus, in modern terms, had so many different personas and personalities that he would have been deemed to suffer from multiple personality disorder.
I think that cuts it just with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Space Ghost, or whatever that is. What's the third one? Holy Spirit. That's 3 personalities in one.
Yeah, I call that Christian math. 1, God the Father. 1, the Son / God. 3, the Holy Ghost. 1, the Holy Ghost. 1 + 1 + 1 = 1. Oh, Christian math.
There are members of Wu-Tang who have less aliases than those gods.
Yeah. So it is all funny. And I think that the way we're moving now, and everybody wants to try to reinterpret, and the term God of the gaps, many people don't quite understand what that is. But it is that every time somebody figures out something new, a new invention comes up, a new discovery comes up, the theologians and everybody tries their absolute best to try to shoehorn it in as if it was already in the text. Worst of all are in Quranic text, because the Quran has one thing that doesn't allow them to be somewhat flexible. In Christianity and Judaism, what we say is that God inspired the text, except for the 10 Commandments, which is a different story. But in Islam, the 23-year revelation to Muhammad is God's direct, only and true word. It's perfect, it's a miracle, and it cannot be tampered with. So it contains all signs, they say. Yet, in this all signs, Muhammad claims that Adam was created from sounding clay, and that he flew on a winged animal through space to split the moon. Now, you can't put this together. So what is done, you ignore one element of it, the completely unscientific, and then you add and say, this is found in this verse. This is what it could mean. And just as an aside, while we're at the Quran anyway, so when we have the verse, the sword of the verse, which is a way to subjugate non-believers, and if they don't convert, they at least have to pay a special tax, and do that while they bow and bend to show how subordinate they are to the Muslims, who really control the land. That's the only way they have a right to live there. And it's tenuous at best. There's another verse where it says that if you are an unbeliever and you don't follow the right rules eventually, you will be roasted and your skin will be renewed for more pain. I have seen many Muslim apologists claim You see how clever Islam is? They knew that the pain receptors were in the skin, not how awful the text is.
Yeah, I'd also just like to add for that because I think I hope everybody knows I agree with you, and it's absolutely disgusting. But um, you can use like charcoal face masks for that, and they're not even expensive, and they're brilliant. There's no reason to go to the Quran to work on your skin.
I'm going to do that now. I feel better already.
We should all do face masks after this.
Yeah.
Face mask party. Honestly, thank you, Harry. I love your story, and let me rephrase. I think you're brilliant, and I love the way you think. So just I want to ask one more question before maybe we get to some, questions from our listeners. So what made you make the decision to write that book?
Well, I was sitting in the pandemic. I've been very busy with work all my life. I had a couple of months where I could do virtually nothing. And there I was sitting in an apartment in London and decided that I was going to write. And I looked through my 20 years of notes, sat it down, decided which chapter I was going to have, just to share my story and also to have it written off, to get it off my chest. What I'm hoping that it has done, and I've actually had a couple of people who said they stopped going to church, but that wasn't the main issue. I wanted to make sure that people who read what I have written come away with their own questions. And the way I've done it is, in each chapter, I have used Occam's razor, who himself was a Catholic priest or monk. And Occam says that normally the most simple answer to a question is almost always right. And I think that's one where you should look into how many hypotheses are needed to get to an answer. If you have to say, if God exists, and if he had a son, and if there's a Holy Ghost, and if he actually was sacrificed, and if the Pontius Pilate trial is true, then there is something to believe in. Now, all those ifs are so many hypotheses, and you then come to the other side of this, which I didn't go into to that detail, but the question is, what is more likely? Would a creator be this stupid? Would a creator exist in this space, or as some now say, in another space and time, which means the same as not existing? So I just thought it would be interesting to use Occam's razor, and every chapter I end with a couple of Occam's razor questions, and I've had a lot of good feedback from that. And most religious people have been troubled, but not offended. I think what's happened is atheists have read the book and found it to be enlightening because they learned stuff that they haven't thought about before, and a few on the fence have jumped.
That sounds awesome. And I want to say one line that goes with your book and everything you just said, but they don't say it as eloquently as you, but probably more the way I would say it. The hip hop artist slash poet Keith Murray says, "If your if was a spliff, we'd be all fucked up." and I'll just elaborate for anybody who doesn't know. They're saying that if every time you said if it was a joint, like a marijuana joint, we'd all be high. Meaning it's all if. But I think if is a great thing all the time. I always say this, and I really mean this. I got in a lot of trouble as a kid asking questions, and I think a lot of us probably did. And it's one thing that leads a lot of people to either being secular or at least considering yourself a critical thinker. There's nothing wrong with any question. The old adage, there are no stupid questions. I agree. There are no stupid questions because even if it doesn't make sense to you or it's something everybody else knows, if you're asking the question sincerely, it's something you need to learn. So you ask, you learn, you grow, repeat.
I don't know how much you read in my book, but I've tried to show how to think about this, and that is, nobody is fearful or afraid or even embarrassed about criticizing another religion. And I've done this. You tell a Christian about Muslim having flown on a winged animal to the moon, and they laugh. And then I say, so Jesus was crucified and came back after the weekend, on day 2 actually, the 3rd day, but it's 2 days after. Yeah, but that's a different story. And so the way to go about handling your own beliefs, that is to look at some other belief and see how impossible it is, and then question your own belief in that context, in that light. You may still believe after, but good for you.
Yeah.
it is probably because you are fearful of leaving it.
I know somebody who is an evangelical Christian and speaks in tongues and lays hands and says that the Catholics
Yeah.
are idiots because they think that the wafer turns into the body of Jesus.
Hmm.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, but
Yeah.
you speak in tongues. So, it's all
Yeah.
relative, right?
Yeah.
Whatever from your perspective. That's kind of what you said earlier, too, with the cultural influence. If you're around it and it's normal or what you're expected to you, you don't analyze it in a different way because you just accept it as that's how we behave.
I have heard that people who speak in tongues have some really good tongue action.
There we go. That was,
Well,
well, wow, from hot dogs to tongue action. At least there was a lot of intellectual stuff in between.
there was a lot.
One of our listeners, they had posted someday they want to read works of other atheists, and I think honestly this is probably a really good place to start with Harry's book, because Mr. Margulies puts it in a way that you do not have to be a theologian. You do not have to be well versed in the Bible or the Quran. It's very easy to digest, and that's something that I greatly appreciate. It's also the way it's divided up into chapters. It's very easy to just pick it up, start a little bit at a time, and then put it down and come back later. Because of the questions that he asks, it actually puts you in that mindset that you want to have these questions and kind of dig a little deeper on your own time. So I really recommend it for anyone that would like to pick up an atheist author. I'd just definitely start with him.
Well, thank you very much. For those who don't want to read my book, I can at least recommend that go to my link tree in my Twitter space and on Instagram, where I have a lot of interviews that I have done in England that have turned out really well. And I think we can go into that together with a question. I mean, the morality of the Bible, I think, is one more thing we need to discuss. The morality of the Bible, even if seen as metaphor. And I think we can maybe have somebody engage in this, and I can answer some question where that comes in.
And I have one request here. Go ahead, Zagros.
Hey guys, how are you? So when you said that Trinitarian Christians make that mathematical error, 1 + 1 + 1 = 1. So I disagree with that because I don't think it's a matter of math. It's like a violation of even more fundamental laws, like the laws of thought, or also known as like the 3 laws of logic. Because if you say that A equals x, and B equals x, and C also equals x, you must therefore conclude A equals B equals C. But what the Trinitarian Christians do is that they say A equals x, B equals x, and C also equals x, but A and B and C are not equal. So that's like
Yeah,
an
you get rid
even
of the
deeper
one.
violation, and perhaps the source of many such like faulty reasonings.
I will give you very high marks on that. I think you have gone a step more philosophical than I have. I have tried to find the simplest way of explaining myself, and I just think that I'm trying to use sarcasm. And if you follow me on Twitter, you will find that is I ask a question that is deliberately sarcastic, that is way out there. I can ask a question like that. How scientific is it when we find that Muhammad flew on a winged animal to the moon without air? It's right through space and split the moon. And that forces people. You're absolutely right. I mean, it is, to use the language that has been used, I say, I don't want to pronounce it like that, but it's effed up completely. It's the same as transubstantiation. You eat the wafer, you drink the blood, it turns in your mouth into the body and the blood of Christ. And then they say, no, we are not cannibals. It is not, and I say again, it is not a symbol. It is. And I mean, that is absolutely crazy, batshit crazy. And people have to do that, and they have to believe. We have just to continue that for a bit, and I really thank you for your input here. And we can go on very high on this. So the Pope, for instance, and I've taken that on in my book, he says that climate change is affected by humanity. Fine. So why not allow condoms? And I can go one step further with that and say, oh, they're not allowed to because you can't avoid at least the risk of getting pregnant. I say the risk of getting pregnant is that a condom will burst, but more than that is that they allow the rhythm method, which is already having agreed that you can choose the safest periods in the menstrual cycle, which in itself means you have admitted that sex is for pleasure, but you still deny it.
And Harry, most believers who I've known don't have much rhythm, so that's out the window.
Well, I must also point out that, like, you don't know that God, gave us that instinct, for sexual arousal and pleasure to test us so that, we can have something to battle with constantly.
Well, if there is a God who did that, and then I must say, why would God give us something that would just create trouble, and different trouble in different jurisdictions? I will quickly take that on. Judaism is a religion with high sexuality. A Jewish man is supposed to go home and satisfy his wife at least every Sabbath. Then comes St. Augustine, who enjoyed sex so much he couldn't stop talking about it. He had a mistress pregnant. And in his older days, he decided sacrificing this for the Lord would be good. And he destroyed sex for Christianity forever.
And then Ben Shapiro did it for Judaism.
Well, Ben Shapiro, I've tried to take him on a bit, and he's, he and Jordan Peterson went to visit the holy sites in Jerusalem, and I've had a couple of tweets with picture. I was just there. And I say, why did God choose one little place somewhere to make holy and different holy for different so they have something to fight about? There has to be reason. So what is more, going back to the Occam's razor question, what is more sensible? That God gave us and the animals the instincts to procreate whether we want to or not, or that we have evolved to procreate, which is a natural thing, and that we enjoy sex for pleasure, which is a natural thing. And the Pope has tried, and I think I take that on in my book as well, tried to say we should now acknowledge that God has given us food and given us sexual pleasure, which he takes away. And I say, well, if God has given us that, how about starvation in parts of the world? Is he not responsible for that then?
No,
So
God
they
does
always
the
want
good
it
things,
their own way.
only the good.
Only the good. God of the good, not of the gaps.
No, the bad is the bad guy that God made, but it's not God's fault that the bad guy makes you do bad stuff. It's very difficult to understand, Harry. You have to open your eyes.
We had sacrilegious discourse here. Thank you so much for joining us. Go ahead with your question. Is this husband or wife?
It is husband.
Hello.
Hello. I just wanted to say I really enjoyed the talk. I mean, it was really great. I have a couple of things. One would be, I'm assuming, and I feel bad about this because I've been friends with Harry on Twitter for a long time, but I have not read the book, but I'm assuming there are links on where to purchase it in the thread that's going on.
There is. So I posted in the nest, which is the top of the Twitter space. There is the link tree to ask why is it, and then you can find out where to get the book and also some additional links to YouTube videos.
Perfect. And then the only other thing I was really going to add is that Harry said something earlier in the conversation about he's had a few people maybe read his book and go over the edge and things like that. But I think one of the things with everybody that I know that's involved in the atheist community, I think one of the most important things that is out there is that there's places for people to go to have easy access to find information of rational thought about what it means to be atheist, what it means to be without God, in books, on the internet, and podcasts, what have you. But I think that's the more that's accessible, the better off it is for people that are questioning their religion. And that's really all I had to say today.
Yeah,
So
thank you for that, and that's right. I just want to add to that. It is the difficulty is how to start the journey, because you are from childhood indoctrinated. It's like you're going around with a blanket over your head since childhood. What's that guy always runs around with a blanket in a cartoon?
You're thinking of a hijab.
No, not quite. No, I'm thinking hijab. I come to separate.
I know.
Yeah. And anyway,
Linus from the Peanuts.
So yes, exactly. So I think there are two elements to this. One is, and I think they should be separated. How do you start the journey, and what support can you get during the journey? People may lose family, they may lose friends, they lose the security in the congregation, they may want to pretend for the longest time. So that is the first step and the most difficult one. The second step is once they come to the reason and look at texts with open eyes, is how do you support them then? But that's an easy one, because then when you come to liberation, you start getting rewarded. It's like a high.
Yeah, I'm with you. Once you start feeling that, like you said, the sense of liberation, there you don't necessarily need to give someone any more incentive. That is the incentive, the feeling of
Yeah.
feeling mentally free. I say this a lot, and people don't like the phrase, but I do consider being a member of a religion the same as being a mental slave. It's your mind is not free to do what it wants. You've been told what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and unless you start thinking outside of that religion, you are a mental slave.
And here's what I often say to people, say, if you don't have God, how would you live? How would you believe it's normal? So I say, well, that's what the jihadist suicide bomber says. He has God. Which one are you for? What interpretation of God are you for? And here's another one that I have taken on a bit on Twitter and I find quite funny. How is it that God is supposed to be the best ally against abortion when he smashed babies on rocks, he rips pregnant bellies open, he sacrifices all the firstborn of Egypt, drowns everybody in the world except one family, and even sacrifices his innocent son? So I think the problem is, for Christians mostly who are into this, first of all, God is not an ally. He's okay with abortion. There's even one space in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where a wife being suspected of infidelity goes through a kind of abortion ritual. So he's not into that.
And God tells them how to make the potion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's quite amazing how God's influence in all of this. So I think it's very important to understand what God is and what he isn't. And yet this goes over. So the next element in this is, so then you find that this space and these people are more interested in the unborn than the living. Because as soon as you're born, now you're on your own. Should be the other way around.
Absolutely.
Yeah, welcome, BA.
Hey,
If you want
thanks
to
for
chime
having
in.
me, guys. Really enjoy the hot dog show. So great job there. So Harry, great to hear you speak. You speak as well as you tweet. So I appreciate you hearing you. I haven't read the book, but I do look forward to the opportunity to do that at some time. One of the things you talked about is tribalism, and it's something that's I use the term minimal group paradigm a lot to really talk about that us versus them mentality. I mean, it's ingrained in through our society. You say that even us skeptics, we're victims of it ourselves. Just as it's part of the human condition. I think it's part of our evolutionary biology.
I
How do
agree.
we how do we fight against that? Because I see religion as it's a manipulation of that tribalism. It's based upon the belief of the word God, right? So do
Yeah.
you believe the same God that I do? Do you not? And so how do we as individuals and as skeptics try to avoid those pitfalls, and how do we push that out to, like you said, I mean, it's in sports. I mean, we teach it boys and girls, it's us versus them all the time. How do we fight against that?
So it's an extremely good question. I'm not sure that I'm philosophical enough to, but I'll give it a try. First of all, by recognizing that we are tribal. And once you recognize a thing, it's easier to start fighting it. And that is, you have to ask yourself, why do I agree with this but not with that? Secondly, don't single out religion. It's politics. Look at it now. And sports. And so, to some extent, I don't think we can help being tribal. And I think it starts evolutionary this way. My life is more important to me than your life. My family's life I want to survive, and they're more important than your life. And my community is more important than yours. Otherwise, how come that we sit and are totally upset that some worker on a building whistles when he sees a lady walking by nicely, and that is the worst microaggression ever, while what they do in Iran hardly gets mentioned? There's tribalism even among the clever people. There's even tribalism, I think, perpetrated, I use that word deliberately, by TV journalists. They end everything that has to do with a catastrophe or anything else and say, we pray for you. What does that mean? Are you normalizing idiocy? I think I mentioned in my book at one point when there was an airplane that had blown up in Air France on the Toronto runway at the airport. They had gotten all the passengers off before because the crew did an extremely good job. What did they say? It's a miracle. No fucking hell, I'm sorry. A miracle would have been if the plane blew up and the passengers went out alive. That would have been a miracle. That the staff did a fantastic job doesn't. So I think sort of how we use words, terminology, miracle when it's not a miracle. A miracle means something extraordinary outside of reason, outside of biology, such as a next life or raising people from the dead. If that is possible, we might start teaching creationism.
I want to say this because the person you're speaking to, BA, if anybody doesn't know, I'm speaking to the goes by the bad is what you see. But he always says, and this is his that I've taken on, well, something I've learned from him, obviously not his originally, but he calls the religion thing a language virus. And
Yes.
you're hitting on it right now because they use words like afterlife. There is no afterlife. Afterlife is death. And and like you said, miracle. Well, it means the suspension of the laws of nature in your favor. So it has nothing to do with something good happening. There has to be something from God, the divine. And we have to be careful about the words we use because, like you said, they're embedded in us by society, by culture, and we just don't even think about it. Meanwhile, you have everybody walking around like zombies going, pray, 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 when they might not even think that's the right thing to do, but they're just not thinking about it.
One of the things I also wanted to mention is that in regards to journalism is that how often do you hear atheists in the news? I mean, hardly ever, because it doesn't fit the status quo. Nobody wants to hear about the atheist volunteer who, helped to build a better community in the neighborhood. But if it was, the Christians that came and, did something, oh, that's different. That's newsworthy. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and you know what? You're absolutely right. Can I tell you something that is a personal experience? I have difficulty getting interviewed because I'm not a theologian. This is my strength. I'm not an apologist. That's my strength. I look at text for what it says. And they would take a theologian and an apologist to explain away the inexplicable and nod and say, yeah, that's right. So Frank Turek, I suppose everybody knows who that is. I take him on Twitter a lot. I'm not trying to put them down personally. So I think what he says, though, is beyond belief. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, to which I say, but you have enough faith to believe in incredible stories. So to go back, though, to the question about tribalism, I think that it is in secular society. We're also tribal, and we don't always know it. It doesn't always surface. So I really like the way you explained the thinking of the questioner here, and that is we need to fight it in ourselves, in our communities, in our families. I have raised a family with now 4 grandchildren. The youngest one is only 3, but down to the 5-year-old here, all atheists, all clear thinkers, all know that you have to, and still, I love my grandchildren more than any other grandchildren. From that follows tribalism, which is genetic.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful in saying that it's all bad. I mean, it's provided the means for us to flourish on this planet, but I see that in our society, and Mr. Turdhead that you talked about, I will attack an individual like that because I see them as the problem. It's never a God speaking for itself. It's always an asshole like Turd.
Yeah.
So I take a little bit different approach, and I understand yours. They've lost any respect. They don't show me any respect because of the gaslighting that I see. And that when I say language virus, it's more of I'm being more PC when I say that because I really see it as gaslighting. I appreciate you speaking out as always. I'll let others ask their questions, but thanks for trying to field that very tough question.
Did my best.
And thanks for hopping up here, BA. It's always nice to hear from you. We do have another question, I believe, from Simone. If you want to unmute your mic and ask your question, welcome.
Hi. So, first of all, I'm very impressed, and many of the people that are in here know me, and they already know that I'm going to fundamentally agree with you, and I'll buy your book as well. But I have a question which may be going outside the bounds here. I read a lot of books on exobiology and exoplanets. And one of the things that serious scientists who are studying the origins of life do is they say, here's our best guess about what a methane, what might evolve on a methane world, or what might evolve in a world that had this kind of pressure, etc. And I understand that people created God. People created all of these books. We're filling some kind of need within ourselves to answer some kind of question. I wonder if it's not possible that there are things out in the universe that we just don't understand and that operate under different rules than us, and that can't be a real thing.
Wow. That is a tough question, and I'm gonna start with answering it a bit jokingly. In an endless universe, everything can exist. So there's a planet somewhere out there where there are people who have been created or have evolved, who eat with their rectum and excrete with their mouth, and also believe that they have been created in the image of God. What then happens is that we are a grain, less than a grain of sand in this huge universe. And people's lives are a microsecond of a microsecond of a microsecond in this huge universe. I'm not denying that there are things we don't understand. Science still has to discover things, and we can. If we, however, give in to the fact that there are things, we can say there are things we can't explain, but if we give in to something neutral, or aliens, I think I tweeted about this the other day. So aliens are coming to Earth and they put up the pyramids, which is an energy source and nobody can explain it. And then they're only coming back to anally probe a couple of toothless men in a forest. The ridiculous part in this, in my mind, is if you believe that, and I'm not saying it's a generic you, if one believes that. So
I don't believe that.
So I'm not harping on you.
Yeah.
Then you can throw out biology and science and start teaching creationism. Because who can for sure say that there isn't a life after that? There's no way of evidencing that, but there's no reason to believe it. And I think supernatural explanations, and I've gone after Dr. Peterson for that. He now has found Jesus together with his daughter. I don't know if you've had a chance to see that I just posted a little video against Peterson's daughter on this. But when you find Jesus, and it's also all of this tribal and all of this that he goes into, and I tweeted one question to him which he hasn't answered. Is there any need for supernatural explanation? And I think that my view is when we come to that explanation of things we yet do not understand, it will be natural. There's no reason to believe that there's a soul that leaves us that is outside our brain. If we believe that, we should stop teaching biology. So we have to make a choice. I hope I didn't come across as harsh. I really understand your question.
No, and you have to understand that I do fundamentally agree with you, and I'm not in any way trying to be disruptive of what you're saying. It just strikes me as sort of as an interesting thought experiment, because when people say, well, God is going to come back, God is going to come back, my response, or God is evil, not that I believe in God, but as a thought experiment, in my head somewhere it goes, why do we think, other than the fact that we created him or her or it, why would we think that it would share any of our values or any of our morals or any of our beliefs?
Because we're extremely conceited animals.
So the answer is just we're simply too self-involved.
Well, I think there's a second element to that, and that is Yuval Noah Harari wrote a couple of books that I really enjoyed. And one of them, he wrote about why did we evolve bigger brains? Why did we become what we are? And his thought is that when we learned to harness the fire and cook the food, it took so much less energy to digest it that there was room for a bigger brain. So circumstances, happenstances gave us a bigger brain, and then we can use it. And then with that follows, of course, the natural feeling that we are special and I am more special than you. And then the same people who think that, it's quite funny, they also now want to have their dogs come to heaven with them, although the dogs don't have a soul. So people want it all kinds of ways, and what they're really after is that need to feel special. And so my answer to your question is, in some ways, which geographical God is it we want?
I have a question for Harry, and this is from one of our listeners. They asked for me to ask you, can faith and critical thinking coexist in one person?
Well, people claim that, and that's a very good question. We have, for instance, the doctor who was the head of the what's he called?
Francis
National
Collins,
Institute of Health, Francis Collins.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Yep.
claims to be able to do that. My problem with it is, at some point, faith must interfere with reality. There must be a point where that is impossible. Some people claim to be really good at compartmentalizing, but then you ask yourself, what is it that goes on in your mind when, like Frank Turek, and I've taken him on in my book, he found faith when his daughter was raped, and in the recovery afterwards, he found reason to find belief. Now, and in Jesus, of course. And his explanation is so unscientific, and I have a bit of a chapter on that specifically, that you start to laugh almost. What in his mind allows him to say that? What is in his mind that says that God cannot interfere in the natural world? It would create havoc. To which I've asked, if God would have tied up that MF of a rapist before he did anything, and he was sitting there limp on a chair till the police came, all that would have happened is these people would have greater reason to believe. And his way out of this is to say then, God must have meant something else. The 6 days of creation means something else. It means an eon of time, which everybody on this space, I think, know wouldn't work because the creation order is wrong. An eon of time without the sun, an eon of time with vegetation without light, without the sun, just wouldn't work. A flat earth would never have worked. What the religionists often do not understand is the Earth's atmosphere and condition wasn't created for us. It was here and we evolved into it. And on the same speculation still, there are other planets with other conditions where life may evolve differently and we have no understanding of it.
Thank you for the answer, Harry. I think we're going to wrap this up.
Harry, thank you for joining us again. I know it is a little bit late for you over there in London, but really appreciate you coming on and talking with us about your points of view and also sharing some insights into your book. If there was one takeaway from all of this, what is something that you would like for us to give some thought into?
Well, you on this space, very rational people, what you should be is extremely happy and lucky no matter what the road was to get there. Imagine all the others that live in oppression, that live with having to burqa up, and it's called liberation. Imagine all the people who live in Christian societies where they are okay with murdering doctors, but don't want to have an abortion. So let's take ourselves a bit and nudge ourselves in the arm and say how lucky we are to be able to discuss this openly and freely. Right or wrong, doesn't matter. We are able to discuss this freely. And I think free discourse, number one, is important. Number two, without free discourse, we turn to violence. And it happens far too often.
Thank you for sharing that.
If I can ask everybody on this space to help me with one thing, and that is I have just recently posted earlier today
YouTube clip. Yep.
A YouTube clip, and I'm taking on Jordan Peterson's daughter, and in some extent is what her claim, and I don't go through this now. Please have a look at it. Please retweet it if you like it and make it work for me, because I think these need to be debated. When somebody as powerful as Jordan Peterson and his daughter just claim something without any evidence, without any reason, it has repercussions that need to be taken on. And for the rest of you, first of all, thank you for listening. Secondly, it was really a pleasure to be on. I like the questions, and I think I've been engaging with extremely smart people. Thank you.
And we did share that link, and it is on our OK Atheist page as well. So we'll make sure that that's shared out as a reminder. So thanks to everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. This has been just a fantastic session. And Infidel, thank you for also being flexible with your schedule today. And Harry Margulies, and to your, I believe it was your granddaughter that we met the other day. Just thank you
That
for
was my daughter, actually.
your
Raquel,
daughter.
the person we spoke to was Harry's daughter. Yeah.
Thanks to her as well for coordinating a lot of this too. So just appreciate everyone all around. So everyone have a good night. If you haven't already, please follow Zaylen or Infidel, OK Atheists, and set a reminders up for notifications. And we'll see you next Thursday.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And again, Harry, thank you so much. You were amazing. And I just want to say one last thing. The way you closed this was something I say all of the time. It doesn't matter what we think, as long as we're open and we keep talking and keep having these conversations, everybody involved will grow. So, anyway, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening and being part of the community. Love it.
Have a good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.